All right, welcome to this episode of Better Call Saul. Rachael Real and I are talking to Saul Klein. Hey, Saul.
How you doing, Jennifer? Good to hear from you again. Talk to you, Rachel. Good to see you.
Good morning, everybody.
So today we're going to talk about data. And I know, Saul, we know this is your favorite topic. So we'll try to hone it in a little bit. We'll see.
Yes, we got it because it's something
It's
we
a-
can talk about for a long time.
Right.
It's a big
do we got
topic.
3 hours?
Yeah, right. But I think okay, so as it seems like, let's just stick to two buckets. Like one is, what is the data we as agents need to know for the consumers to upgrade the job that we do for them? And then let's talk about the data that we need to know as realtors, as business people for like our business. So you want to start with the consumers first? Like what can make us better? What data should we know that makes us better agents?
So, I think this is kind of a great subject because we know the real estate industry is changing.
What is it?
Yeah.
No.
Well, of course, I've been saying this for 30 years, right? So it's like nothing new, but we know that the change is accelerating.
Right.
As we look at all this, and we talked about the fact that commissions are being compressed, and we talked about why.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about the fact that the role of the real estate professional really is going to finally evolve into that role of being more of a consultant.
Correct.
Than a salesperson.
Right.
Right. Although you got to have sales skills and you got to have communication. I mean, that's still all there.
Right.
But now you have to become an expert in your community. And when I say that, it's about understanding the data around what's taking place.
But there's so much data, like there's so much.
So let's put it that the data only has value if it's in a context.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we can see a practical application for it. So if I'm a real estate professional, I want to know everything about the areas in which I serve. And that's like the information, it's data.
Yeah.
And so, and what type of information would I be interested in knowing about? And we talked about this, like if somebody's moving into an area, they might want to know what new facilities are being constructed.
Mm-hmm.
They might want to know, is there a high foreclosure rate?
Yeah. Are there like maybe a lot of rental units, and like if they're an investor or if they want to live there? I mean, a lot of people want to know that.
Yeah, so there's like this unified, we talked about this unified view of residential and commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Because things that happen in commercial properties around residential properties has an effect on it.
And it feels like this is a case for, we did an episode on should you have a niche, and this is a case for having the niche, right, Rachel?
Yeah, even just a niche being a specific town that you might work in. So if I can logistically go out as far as, my clients want me to go within reason, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But do I have more knowledge of and more information and more data on communities that are super close to me or where I live personally? Definitely.
Right.
So that's where I think ultimately, and like we talked about before, you ultimately kind of end up with a niche just by default.
Yeah.
Especially if you're working with a sphere and all those people are people that by default are near you.
But like in Cincinnati, we have 52 neighborhoods. But like for us, we really focus and know more about 5 of them. So exactly. I think like picking between, like if your city's like that, like picking between 3 and 5 that you really know a lot about, like what's going on. And
exactly
in, like Saul says, like in the commercial space as well. Because it does affect it.
Doesn't mean you have to be a commercial expert.
No.
Right?
No, you definitely don't.
You just know what's going on. And you know that
absolutely.
they're gonna, right? Oh, they're gonna build a shopping center. Oh, they're gonna build a food store here. They're gonna, right? Oh, they're putting light rail through here. Or all these things that you would then know about that you could convey to your customer, to your consumer.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's a huge thing. It's a huge value add. I'm in a town of about 45,000. And for a while, I spent a couple of years on the town center board, which was for the revitalization of the downtown area. Nice. So through some connections I've made there over the years, that program is now kind of disbanded. But through the connections I made through those people, the property owners, the landlords, the business owners, that's definitely something that people know in the community that I have a little extra knowledge on. Yeah. If I don't have the answer, I know who to call to get it.
Right.
Let's think about the things that are going on in the government.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Is there going to be rezoning in certain areas? You know, because those kinds of
Absolutely.
things don't happen overnight. It takes,
Right.
and so you can know about them ahead of time.
Right.
Right.
Is there going to be federal money or state or any kind of money coming in to improve? Rachel, you mentioned revitalization, which
Absolutely.
typically has some type of funding to create that and make that happen. And why is that important? Because the
Taxes.
cities and states, yeah, they're all interested in bringing up the tax base.
Right.
Well, and desirability of the residential neighborhoods that are around those locations.
So data, what data should you know about? Well, I think anything associated with the areas in which you're going to sell property. We mentioned there are indexes you can look for, walkability scores, foreclosure rates, in
absorption rate,
absorption, all this stuff can be made available to some. And I go back to this idea where commissions are being compressed. So you've got to figure out how you're going to derive revenue from this. And one way is to be able to demonstrate expertise about your subject area, because that's a value add.
Yeah,
particularly if your competitors can't do that.
Yeah. And I do want to talk about for realtors, like for our business, what do we need to know? But one of the things that really helped me when I was like figuring out like this data was even just as simple as setting, like looking at the 24-hour market watch. Most MLSs have that. And you can see if you're looking at it every day and you see what's come on the market, what's come off the market, and that's the MLS as a whole. But you can set them up too for like your area, right? You can set your own CMA search up to give you the data. But that's been really interesting because you can see trends as an agent before other agents see them.
Well, absolutely. So my MLS in San Diego MLS, I get texts like every week. And they said, what areas are you interested in? I put like every zip code, right? Because I would want to see what's going on in my city. I sold real estate here. I've been a broker. I've been in the business for 47 years and I don't sell anymore, but I like to know.
Yeah.
I know I used to drive around all these areas, right?
Yeah.
And sell real estate. So I like to see that. And I get that on my phone. Now, sometimes it's an annoyance because my phone just goes.
Right.
All day long.
But if I were selling real estate, I'd want to look at that and maybe put a summary together for the people that I'm working with, buyers or even sellers, so I want to keep them in the know. And so that information that's made available, that data that's made available to me and to other realtors, I guarantee you most other realtors aren't using it.
Yeah.
Right.
At least not the way we're talking about it.
Right. And I think too, like, I know like sometimes the data can be overwhelming, right? But if you like even having where you're interviewing somebody about that data that they can then create the context for it, that you then can use for your, I mean, there's a lot of ways around it if it feels like overwhelming, I guess.
Well, and NAR puts out a lot of great information.
Yeah, they put out a ton.
Just economic info, and that's all valuable information because when people buy property, they want to know what's really going to happen. And I hear this all the time. What's happening in the market? When is real estate
buyer or seller? No.
When is it going to crash? When is the market? It can't go up forever. Right? You hear all this stuff.
Yeah.
I want to present people with the statistics that say, you know what? We haven't seen the top of this yet for a number of reasons. Right. And we've talked about some of those reasons, right? Because there are people that are willing to buy this up, in particular, big investors and big investment firms that have this idea they're going to hold it for a while so they can pay more for it. Because they're going to, and then you've got the inflation piece. That's a lot of data around what's happening with money that's being flushed into the economy and how might that affect the value of real estate or people's desire to buy real estate. And so data, so this idea of data is pretty broad.
Yeah.
And so we want to break it down into different areas. And the real important one at first is to say a real estate agent wants to use certain data just for their own knowledge and for their own business. And then they want to know about data because consumers are interested in certain amounts of data. So if I were practicing real estate data, I'd be trying to decide what types of information are going to be the most desirable for the people that I'm working with, because it's all accessible to me today like it's never been before.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the challenge becomes too, like you're talking about becoming more of a consultant for our clients. You look at the fact that the clients have access to the same data that we do, or at least in another version of it. They have so much information and don't know how to put it into perspective.
Right.
I mean, they just don't. So I think our job is going to definitely become more of the person who has to look at all of that data, put it in perspective for the sellers and the buyers so that they can make educated decisions.
Mm-hmm.
That's where our role is going to come in, and our role is going to change.
So we've always said that, text without context is pretext.
Right.
Right. And so for me, the role of a real estate agent is to put the information about real estate into the context of the life of the person you're working with.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Like, how does it affect them?
Exactly.
And if you don't,
because it could affect the neighbor completely differently.
Right.
And it can be positive or negative.
Right.
Absolutely.
You want to be able to provide that. And again, that's the value of a consultant.
And I think like you don't have to know it exactly. Like you can find out from other people that do know it or have a particular point of view about how to analyze the data and then extrapolate from there, right? Like it doesn't have to be like you have to know everything. Like Rachel said, as long as you know like who to talk to, that works too.
Well,
you're still the resource.
Yeah. So
exactly.
It's great when people ask you questions.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Then because you can give them the answer, which is great, but you also know that they're asking it for some other reason. So you can take that and do with it what you can, figure out a little bit more about why do they want to know that information? What are they going to do with it? Are they looking at starting a business? Maybe they're looking at selling their home. You don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So having that information is a great differentiator, or being able
Absolutely.
And so here's a habit people have is when somebody asks them if they don't know, they either guess or they say, I don't know.
Right.
And the right answer is to say, if you don't know, is to say, I'll find out.
Yeah,
exactly. I don't know, but I'll find out for you.
I don't know, but I'll find out.
Right.
And then you make a promise, then you come back. Make sure you go find out though. Even if you didn't find out, you come back and say, I looked everywhere I could and I couldn't find anything, right?
Right.
That's an opportunity to build a relationship because you're making a promise, you're keeping the promise, it's an engagement.
Right.
And it's better if you could get that kind of information, but don't feel bad if you don't have it.
Right, exactly. Right. I think that's, so what is the information, how is it different for us as realtors when we put it in the context of the data that we need to know for our business? Well, what's different?
And again, Rachel's a practicing broker, but I would say that I would like to know like how many showings, I would like to know how many hours I spend with people. I would like to know how many miles that I drive.
Too many.
Yeah.
Right now, way too many.
Right.
I've had to quadruple my budget for gas, right?
Well, that's a whole nother. I heard this conversation today where people say, I don't put people in my car anymore.
Yeah.
I don't drive them around anymore. They want to drive on whatever. Right. So that's a whole nother conversation. So in my business, I want to be able to figure those types of things out. So that type of analytic will help me have a more efficient, more effective business.
Yeah. Like even the basic thing that we do is how many people do I need to talk to in order to get a deal? And then how many deals do I want? And you can figure out how many people you need to talk to in order to get the deals that you want. Just even that simple.
Take your goal and reverse engineer it backwards.
Yeah, it's a numbers game. Like there's an old real estate trainer, Tommy Hopkins. Like when I got into real estate, he's like the only one. Now you got all kinds of
there's
people,
a billion.
Right? Yeah, but back then you didn't have very many. And so Tommy Hopkins was a famous guy, real estate sales trainer. And his whole thing was, or part of it was, he relished the no. When somebody would say no, because he knew you needed 100, you had to talk to 100 people.
Yeah.
So when somebody said no, it just boom, because go on to the next, because he knew within 100 people he's going to get some business.
Right? You'll find something, right? One step closer.
Exactly. Track it and it'll.
So on the financial side, realtors should track, because everybody's in business for themselves, whether or not they're a broker. And so you need to track your financials. You need to, and so you use something
This is where everybody turns this video off. So
yeah, well, I won't get into it in great detail, but I'm going to tell you, if you don't do that, you're wasting money.
You're not in business. Oh, you're absolutely wasting money. A ton of it too.
Yeah. So I know people might not like to talk about it, but that's one of the most important parts of being in business.
Yeah.
Is cash flow.
I would equate this part of the conversation to the water heater and the furnace of a house. Like if you got to spend money on that is not fun money. This is like the not fun part.
Right. Exactly.
You want to have fun. You want the closing and the commission check, but you don't want to talk about this part of it.
What about so how does all this relate to like us? Because you've said before that it's kind of backwards how the relationship between the MLS and real estate agents work. Like we have to pay to put our information in. Normally you have to pay to get information, right? But that's like not what's happening.
Yeah, so I think that MLSs in the real estate industry, we need to look at a new economic model
Mm-hmm.
for MLS. So if we want to look at what typically happens with content providers,
Mm-hmm.
content providers get paid for the content that they provide.
Right, but we don't.
But in real estate, people will provide content, listing information. That's content.
As
Right.
a people, we do a lot of stuff for free.
And we pay to put it in the MLS. So
We pay to give it to you,
data is
and then
like
we pay
money.
to get it back.
Yeah, the data is like money. So we say, here's some money, and here's some money for taking our money. And so then what happens is that money, that data is released to these to different companies, and they create billion-dollar businesses off of the backs of the people who bring in the money. So a better model for MLSs is to figure out ways to monetize that data, because everybody wants it.
Yeah.
And there are many different segments. So the MLSs should be looking at putting together a program where they charge for that information, and there's enough revenue that comes back. Well, yeah, that comes back and at least pays for the cost of the MLS.
Right.
Now, ideally, it pay for the cost of the MLS and give a couple bucks to the data provider too.
Little profit share happening there.
Well, I read something today, and it makes all the we've been preaching this for years, but photos.
Mm-hmm.
And so, agents get a listing, and then they go get the old listing information, or they get the old photos taken by the previous agent.
Yeah.
Well, what if we use a type of technology that allowed it to be tracked? So all the listings that you take and the pictures you put up there, if other agents use it, and you want to say, go ahead and use it, but I get so much money every time you use my, what, I would go out and take pictures of all the property in my neighborhood, see if there's a place where my MLS would just take it and create a data library.
Right.
That agents
like a royalty for
and you
an
get a
old
royalty
rerun of a TV show, right?
Yeah, you could take like pictures of all the amenities of each of the neighborhoods, because that's like the hardest thing to get a picture of. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes.
And little things that people don't even think about. Where are all the Federal Express pickups? Where are the UPS pickup points? Right? Things that people don't think about, but could be valuable. And a matter of fact, if you had that and gave it to somebody, whether they ever used it or not, it's something that your competitors didn't do.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a totally different world, right?
Yeah. Differentiate and use the data to differentiate, and use it for your customers and use it for yourself.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What else you want to talk about?
I can't believe we wrapped that all up in a nice little bow.
I know, that's the shortest conversation we've ever had. Well, talk to us about the information you're providing on the Data Advocate and how we can benefit from using that as a resource.
Well, so I mean, our website is thedataadvocate.com, and we're still putting this together because this whole idea of being able to utilize the data and also utilize it in a way that's trackable with new technologies is something that people need to learn about. And I talk about this idea that if you don't know the value of something, you're going to give it away or sell it for less.
Yeah, of course, right?
If I don't know the value of my house, I guess, and there's a good chance I'm going to guess low.
But even like that happens with like estate sales and stuff like that. Like people will give away like jewelry or paintings, and then you hear it again. It's like,
they don't
that's
know
the whole Antique Roadshow is brought up on that.
Roadshow. I love it now too when they say 2008 and then they show 2022.
Yeah.
Now they've got enough of these. It's content, right? They got the old content. They show the old content, and then they put up what it was worth then, and then they put up what it's worth now. So they can reuse it over and over and over again.
Right.
And so it's great, right? So we want to look at that aspect and see where it can take us and how it can differentiate us.
So I think, like, to sort of sum up a little bit what we're talking about is think about the data that, like, all the clients ask the same question, right? Like they very rarely come up with different questions. So what are they consistently asking for? And get that data ahead of time.
And what should they be asking for?
Yeah, that they're not asking.
That they're not asking for, right? And that's all available to a degree, right? You can find it. You can, in most cases, you can find this type of information. So right now, get back to this idea of value, right? Until you have value, everything is worthless.
Yeah.
Once you know value, then everything has value. And I use my Hawaii story where the Hawaiians were kind of like a socialistic society, right? Tribal, socialistic. And so when there was a great Mahele, when the property in Hawaii was broken up into 3 parts and distributed. So the royalty got a part of it, a third of it, and then a third of it went to the Hawaiian people, and then a third of it went out for public use. And so the Hawaiian people that got this land, they didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So they didn't, because to them it's like not a concept. Owning land is not something they really understood, right? Because everybody owned everything. It was like,
right.
And so they gave it away, or they sold it for less than it was worth.
Right.
And then on the internet today, we see it all the time, right? Because it's where you go on and you don't read the terms and conditions, and they say, we want to use your data, and you just click yes, yes, yes.
And then yeah.
Right. And so people need to start paying attention to that. But once you realize there's value to that information,
yeah,
you won't as easily give it away. So
which means you won't be using anything. You won't use Facebook. You won't use
right? You're limited to absolutely nothing. Paper books, we're all going back.
Elon Musk is going to put together a social media platform, isn't he?
Probably. I was thinking it would be interesting to see like the MLSs bring the information back to the realtors, right? Because the MLSs are sort of like, they're supposed to be, I thought, like an aggregate of information. So some of the things that people want to know is, like you said, the walkability score. Are there sex offenders? What are the other houses in the width? That should all be like where, when they set up portals, like in the MLS, they should be able to have all that information there. What are the schools, like the elementary school, the high school, everything, like where are the parks? Like, why isn't that in our MLS?
So a couple points here. Some of that information is very sensitive. And so I agree with you. And so actually from, one of the
what's sensitive, me living in a house.
Yeah, we'll get back to that, right? Because of what's going on in the world. But I want to know those types of things, and it should be in the MLS, and it's also useful for legislative advocacy. Right, to know what's going on. So yes, I agree. The MLS should be able to provide data and information back, because it all works into knowing about the properties that are for sale. Now, this other thing that we need to, and we see have heard these conversations for years, and that is we want to be careful that we don't get caught in this trap of providing information that people think is somehow racist, or right. So right. The schools is so great. We want to be able to, people are interested in how good the schools are. And we hear people tell us, you got to be careful about the way you say that, because that can have some racial implication and crime rates. I don't, people were really, and I don't know, maybe you can tell crime rates now, but I think I know there was in the past where people had to be very careful, because that that might be a way to steer. And correct. So using some of this data, if they can prove that you're using it to steer, and you don't have to prove it, they can just say you're using it to steer people from one community to another.
It's a very fine line.
So it's a fine line. So that information available to me as a professional, as a consultant, as a real estate licensee, I want it for me. That information that I then convey to my customer, I have to be careful and understand the laws and know the risks.
So maybe there's some things like, you have the actual name of the schools, but I mean, they can go online and look at the rating.
Maybe you direct the clientele or your customers to the links that are the most comprehensive, the most accurate in terms of their data. I know some links are owned by larger companies that rely on data that isn't maybe so accurate. So, I mean, I see some, there's 2 separate links for Illinois that I see people use all the time. And one is notoriously more accurate than the other, but people tend to gravitate towards the one because it's a bigger name.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is it doesn't give you the big picture.
Right.
And it's oftentimes grossly inaccurate because of the fact that they're using a lot of public information, which we all know is notoriously inaccurate.
So a lot of people, when they're buying real estate, they have different reasons, or they have different criteria.
Yes.
To help them establish what they want. And often, if they have kids, schools they want to know about the schools. Now, you don't want to say necessarily, this is a good school area, this is a bad school area, because that might have some.
Well, how would we know?
Well, no, you might, particularly if you're driving around the areas and the area. But if that's something that your buyers are interested in, then maybe your selection of properties you show them are in those good school districts or whatever they're looking for. But again, you have to be very careful about this, particularly in today's with what's going on today in the country. So just, you want to provide people with the data.
Yeah, but like ours doesn't even say like what the middle school is.
Yeah, but
Your
if you're
listing
an
sheets don't have any of that don't have
yeah, but
full
if you're an
information on
expert
them?
in your area, you're going
Only
to
in
know
one of
that.
my states, not in the other one. Huh?
Really? That's interesting.
So I know what school districts in San Diego because I had kids that went through it.
Well,
Right.
I don't have any
Well, then you got friends that do.
Right.
tiny little terrorists.
And plus, if you're driving around and you know the area and you start right, and you find out, where.
You know what though? The other information I was thinking that I cannot for the life of me understand why it's not attached to the MLS for agent views only is like the auditor or like where things have transferred, because there's houses that do get sold outside of the MLS. And it's like, it should be easy for us as real estate agents to like get that information. Like why
you don't have access to that?
Well, we do, but why isn't it aggregated? Do you know what I mean? And that's like a service that the MLS, like
it could. So you're
right. Be put in there. Like if
suggesting...
if you're asking me what your house is worth, I have access. I mean, the way that we're taught, right, is to go on to the MLS and look at the data or whatever, but that's not the whole picture.
Yeah, there are other sources that could indicate what's sold in an area. And so now we're saying what's sold based on the MLS information, and then what's sold based on any other information, and the MLS could aggregate that.
Yeah.
And, right. That's
I'm just thinking like if we are, in my head, my premise is like as real estate agents, we need to continue to add value to our clients. And in order to do that, we need help from our current vendors to bring that value.
Yeah. So that kind of information the question is, again, at this point, how much money does the MLS have?
Yeah.
Where is it going to deploy the resources that it has? And if it doesn't have enough resource to do those kinds of things, it's either don't do them or raise the fees.
Right.
But if you went back to the model we're talking about where they disseminate valuable, and there's a lot of information that's in the MLS beyond what's sold and what hasn't. And
right. Sell it back to realtor.com.
That wouldn't affect the person selling real estate in the street.
Right.
But could derive revenue for the MLS.
Yeah, which does affect us because then maybe our bill doesn't go up or whatever like that, right? And they become a very, very valuable resource that only you have to be a member to get, right? And so that's like I don't know. Anyway, I feel like we could go down a rabbit hole. Shall we stop?
Well, we definitely could because data is a big subject. So we can keep attacking it over time because I'm seeing big changes in the area of data, and with artificial intelligence, with huge amounts of computing power, with many sources of data, it can all be brought together. And I'm looking at something right now that'll give a unified view of real estate, where when people are selling residential property, they don't really pay attention to what the new things that are going on in the neighborhood are. But I want to know that because if the new things going in would either have a positive or negative effect, maybe.
Agreed. Like there's so many developments that like across the street is just this like big empty space. And it's like, well, what's going in there? Like, is it going to be a bunch of houses? Is it going to be a Walmart? Like, is it going to be a methadone clinic? Like, what is it?
I'm buying this property because I think that there aren't many available, but I didn't know that 2 blocks away, they're going to build a 175 unit apartment building.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Well,
so having that unified view is important.
So what is the best way for people to kind of get in your world, start learning more about data, and if they have questions for you, what's the best way?
Yeah, they can go to thedataadvocate.com, but I'm also on Facebook. We have a group on Facebook that we started in 1995.
Wow.
When we still got some people in that group that were there when we started it, right?
That's
Believe
cool.
it or not. And so
that's the vintage Facebook group, right?
It's the old. It is.
It's
the oldest real estate community online.
That's awesome.
It's called Real Talk, Real Towns Real Talk. So that's something where people don't want to go to a website, but they're in Facebook every day.
Yeah.
Right.
That is, come to Real Talk and they can join that. And the nice thing about that group is we have very authoritative members, or people who are brokers and agents, have been in it for a long time. It's
experts
not like
in the field.
You go some of these groups and you got people, not always right, but never in doubt. And they'll tell you, and they got opinions, and they come across as if, and it's wrong information. Was it a conversation today about antitrust?
Yeah.
And people will step forward and they'll say, hey, it's free speech. It is not about free speech. Oh, we can do this. It's not antitrust. Well, You see, what you have to understand about antitrust doesn't have to be antitrust. It's a per se violation. They're going to come in and say, you know what, you did all these things and we think you're guilty and you got to prove you're not.
Right.
Oh my God.
Right.
Okay.
And that's
What's your email?
Saul at bettercallsaul.realtor.
Nice. And Rachel, if people have a referral for you in Chicago, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Best way to reach me is by cell phone at 630-542-8688 or at rreal@dealwithreal.com.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for being on, guys.
Thanks,
Hey,
all.
nice to talk to you. Take
Bye.
care.